Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Games User Research Book Podcast. This is our inaugural episode in what will hopefully turn out to be a series of informative chats about all things related to user research, user experience, and games. To set the stage for our conversation, it's worth mentioning that video games and the broader creative industries is an area that's seeing incredible innovation and growth. The games industry alone generates about $200 billion in revenue every year, and more than 4 billion people worldwide play games across an enormous amount of platforms. So more than 1 million video games are active at any point in time, with a staggering diversity in genres, forms, and content. The fundamental goal of games user research is to make sure that players experience games the way that designers expect them to. Often, the work of user researchers across industry and academia thus form a kind of an intersection or a glue that connects the technical, design, art, and business aspects of creation and operation of games. In such a rapidly evolving domain, this is an incredibly complex undertaking. And it's this undertaking that we'll focus on in this podcast series, from any and all angles, leaving no stone unturned. In our first episode, we'll focus on the essential but very challenging concept of player experience. I am Anders Draken from the University of Southern Denmark, and I have two co-hosts with me. Leonard.
Well, thanks, Anders, for the really nice introduction here. My name is Leonard Nacke. I'm a professor. I'm a doctor too, but I'm a professor at the University of Waterloo.
Doctor professor.
Exactly. Got all the hair doctor professor. And one of the most cited academics. So Anders wrote that. I don't like to brag, but he's actually right. Like I do get a lot of citations about games user research, and I've helped a lot of companies understand their players. But I really like to work with psychophysiological testing. I haven't really done a lot of that recently because it's something where you need to be in person, and COVID has kind of made that really hard for us to get that sorted. And one of the things that I'm quite interested in is not just how our body but our brains react to experiences and what we can make of that. So really like understanding the behaviors that we exhibit and the ways that our bodies are impacted by the player experiences that we are going through. I think that kind of sums it up. Maybe want to pass it on to Pejman.
Yes. Hi, so my name is Pejman Mirzababai. I'm an associate professor at Ontario Tech University. I've been doing games user research, I think, since 2009, and I had a kind of a mix of academic and industry experience. I think the most notable industry experience was where I worked as a UX research director at Execution Lab Montreal. And then currently I'm also doing some consulting with a couple of companies because I'm on sabbatical from my university job. Most of my work...
How nice. How very nice.
Thank you. It's finishing those soon. Most of my work is motivated by my experience in the game industry. And I think that maybe two most things that I'm proud of is the Games User Research book that we co-edited together, and my new book that's coming out soon, which I'm very excited about. We call it the Game Designer's Playbook, which focuses primarily on interaction designs in game.
Very cool, mate. Very good looking. I am looking forward to reading that one. Well, I mean, introductions done. Let's kick things off with me asking the two of you a question here. So basically, what I wanted to get you to do to help me out with is getting an understanding of what is player experience. Like this concept seems to be sort of integral to our work, right? But what is it really? Leonard, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. I think you can feel free to jump in at any time there, both of you. I think one of the hard things is to theorize, first of all, to theorize what it means, and taking psychological theories, behavioral theories, biological theories that help us understand what players' experience is. But I think in terms of what our colleagues are struggling with most is kind of like how do we design for it? And that's really, for me, that's more the main challenge is like, how do I design for an experience where it's easy to design an artifact. It's really too easy to make something, but experience is always a second order thing. So my interaction with that artifact now causes me to feel something and to engage with something. And I guess that's an important distinction actually to make, because it's the same when people talk about, let's say, happiness versus joy, right? Like joy clearly can be categorized as an emotion, but happiness is a sort of a thing that's more made up of different components. So that's more like an experience that relates on different factors to come together.
Yeah.
And it's the same with player experience, right? Like you might feel a positive or a negative emotion, which leads to a great player experience, but they're very, very separate things. And if you take them by themselves, they might actually be not so exciting to experience. It might not be great to be really sad. So I might feel horrible when I'm sad about something in my life, but when I'm, sad in a game, I might feel compelled by the narrative, and I might feel so emotionally invested that it's actually maybe a cathartic experience for me. And I feel good that I've gone through this. I've overcome the sadness, or I've overcome the struggle or the challenge. For all those Dark Souls players out there, do you like losing? No, not necessarily, but you definitely like the challenge and the hard challenge and overcoming that somehow. So I think that's I could dive into the theories. I mean, we have. I don't want to do that because it's probably not as interesting for our listeners. But we have formed like an inventory, which is like a survey together with colleagues around the world called the Player Experience Inventory. And there we've written the paper and we have the survey, and there we actually break it down into different dimensions. But at no point in the paper do we say like this is the be all end all. This is just our first sort of academic attempt to break down player experience into these different components. But and Pejman might actually talk about that because I think he just used it because we were just talking about that the other day. So he might have actually just
did Lennart's method work, Pejman, or was it?
Did it work for you? Tell me about your experience, Pejman.
So I think maybe I add my perspective on this. The part that, like, I was thinking about it, as Lennart mentioned a few days ago, and I was trying to compare what that player experience meant maybe 10 years ago or even more when we started, and what it means these days now that games are more, I guess, embedded in our daily life, or the player's daily life. And like one of the projects I'm currently working on is a platform for kids to play a game. But one thing that I always think about is the experience is not limited to their time that they are actually playing something. The experience also includes how they access the platform. The experience includes maybe even what their parents view of that platform or of that games, and how they maybe manage that their access. And then there are many other aspects that are around that. One of the things we were looking at some of our survey data, like one thing that impacted the experience was like the quality of internet connection or the size of your screen. And these are, aspects that maybe 10, 15 years ago, we didn't pay that much attention to them because, the way that users consume the game was very different than how they are consuming the game these days.
So if I understand you right, you are saying that the player experience is shaped by more than the game and the player. That there are somehow other dimensions that are involved, because that almost feels a bit counterintuitive, right? I mean, I am playing a game, so the experience should arise in the interaction between me and the thing and the artifact, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I think this is an interesting point. This kind of relates to this early paper that I wrote during my PhD about player experience, when I was looking at the effects of context, and that the context is an important part of the player experience. I think Pejman is alluding to that if you're playing a mobile game at a bus stop, it's a very different context that you're playing this game than if you're playing on your couch and everything's nice and warm and cozy and you got a surround system, maybe you got the right lighting. It's just like a whole different experience. And then you compare that to VR in the lab and, again, very different point of immersion that you're working with there.
Okay.
And now, of course, we're tossing around, technical terms like immersion and stuff. So I want to be careful with that.
Yeah.
So apologies to anyone that's feeling lost.
I think the key here is both for a designers and researcher, understanding that context is very important when you are trying to measure that or where you are trying to design for that experience. To have that context in mind on how your player is going to enjoy or engage with your game. Again, like the context can be something outside the game, like Lennart mentioned, in terms of, where you are playing or what sort of internet connection or a platform you have, but it could be also inside the game. For example, is the game about talking maybe to other players? Then suddenly like your avatar becomes very important. Or maybe the game is about, finishing the level very fast and suddenly being able to compare your achievements to other people, have a huge impact on your experience. And I think the key point I probably want to highlight here is designers need to consider these as they create those experiences for the users to engage with.
That makes sense, yeah. So okay, so the player experience sounds like it's a really, really complex thing, and there are definitely it sounds like there are multiple different aspects of it that we need to dive into in future podcasts, right? But can I ask also? So it's a complex thing. So how do we then measure it, and what are the pros and cons of different measures?
Like that's
how do we measure this complex thing?
I think that's an interesting point. There's no right way to measure this stuff. If you go to any user researcher at any company, there'll probably be always sort of the why measures, sort of looking at not just the behavior, but also looking more at interviewing people, and like really digging deep into that qualitative area where you can ask people, not just how they felt about something, but why they did the thing that they did. Very common approach in user research. Now, of course, there's other methods that we've talked about in our book. It's quite comprehensive in terms of talking about the different methodological approaches that we have. The one that I've mentioned before was sort of this PXI, the Player Experience Inventory. That's a rather new one that we just built, which is a kind of was inspired by means end theory and mechanics, dynamics, aesthetics, where we're kind of thinking about building something that helps us do a quick assessment of player experience using a survey measure. Now, obviously, as you know, self-report, there's always things attached to that that can kind of skew the idea.
Especially with self-report data. So apart from the fact that they are responses that are filtered through the mind of the player, you also have problems. For example, if you build in self-report measures through the internet rather than in a lab. But I wanted to ask you because you've done a lot of work with psychophysiological measures, which are measures of the actual physiological reactions to playing a game.
Yeah.
Why are we not just doing brainwave measures of games when we do user tests? Like, why is this just not standard? Like, why? It sounds so alluring, right? I mean, you measure people's brainwaves, and you know how the balance and however they feel. So why? I mean, we've been talking about this for like 20 years, and yet it doesn't seem widespread adopted. Why not?
Well, obviously, one of the things that you have to think about there is that, first of all, technology has made vast improvements over the recent years. So, we're getting better at understanding what this means. But and Pejman is familiar with that as well, because he worked during his PhD a lot on some of these other measures, not necessarily the brainwaves, but the skin conductance and other measures where you get sort of I think the main problem is you get the many-to-one, one-to-many responses. So you have one response that can mean many things, or you have different things that can all mean the same thing. So it becomes the mapping is not always clear. So it becomes sort of something where you need to have an additional anchor to make sense out of the vast sea of data. And one of the things that I find that actually quite exciting. I've been talking to a couple of companies. There's one in particular that are really interested in building sort of a machine learning model based on physiological data. And now that's where it gets fascinating, because then you can train your model based on the responses that somebody gives during gameplay, and the more people are using it, the better the prediction the prediction will get. And so this is really something to keep in mind as the technology advances. This becomes more encompassing. But I think the important thing is that you're really, if you're doing solely behavioral measures, if it's physiological or otherwise, you're kind of missing out on a lot of the underlying measures that are that are not necessarily measures, but that are maybe like hard to understand, right? We have gameplay as an instrumental value. You could say it's that I'm enjoying the gameplay, because again, if you use means end theory, that would be like the means end would be having enjoyment in the gameplay. But then you also have all of these other things that are attached to that. I want to have some sort of self-fulfillment, some sort of autonomy, some meaning, some, being curious about the world, mastering the world, all of these different psychological or social things that are drawing us into the game. And then on top of that, you have all the artifact-related things, the functional things, like how easy is it to control? What kind of feedback are we getting? How are the audio visuals? How are the goals displayed to us? What's the challenge level? All of that stuff, right? So, It becomes hard because, so you're asking, why do we have so much trouble with player experience? Because it's incredibly complex. It's an incredibly complex thing that even we as researchers that have been working in this field for 2-3 decades, some of us, we are struggling on understanding this specifically, right? So it is actually a hard problem.
One thing I want to mention, maybe took a step back a bit, on these, because in the projects that I work, usually as a consultant with different studios, it's very kind of easy to say, hey, let's measure this, let's figure out something, or how players are experiencing our game. But I usually kind of want to understand, why do you want to know this information? How are you going to use this information? And based on that, there might be a different way to address this. So, like, I give you a couple of examples here. Imagine you have a service that you have multiple games, and you want a way to measure which of these games are performing better from a user experience perspective. You probably can look at the gameplay data in terms of how long players are playing, or which one makes more revenue, or motivate more purchase. But one question might be, which one gives players a better experience? In those cases, you often need some form of a number that says, I don't know, this game is like 5.6 in terms of that experience. The other game is 4, the other game is 3, and we have a game that's 8 or whatever. And that's where, that PXI that Lennart mentioned would become very useful, because it can summarize that experience into one easy number that you can compare across other games or other platform if you use the same measure. Or maybe the way that, if you use physiological measure, maybe you could say, okay, this game gives players a higher, or impact their, players physiological, and this is like a number of like average heart rate or average skin conductivity or whatever. It can be one measure that you can use to compare. And then there could be another scenario that the designers want to know, which aspect of that one particular game they need to improve to be able to bring that one number higher. And that's where you may want to better understand behavior. So we look at behavioral based measure. We look at maybe observing what players are doing, where they are struggling, what are the friction, or talking to players, and then try to, let's say, quality, be able to explain the reasons behind that number that we got from a survey such as a PXI. So wanted to kind of distinguish between these two kind of maybe different use cases that I've seen sometimes people mix them together.
I think, Pejman, you should also, when you're looking at that, I think you should kind of point back to your own work when you worked on those biometric storyboards.
Yeah, exactly.
And to think about and honestly, I think this is an idea that should have long caught on. Maybe there's a potential for a company in there as well. But like, I just think it was such a good idea to think about, okay, here's how the designer envisions the game. And this is the design intent that he has or they have for that game. And this is sort of a way that you can display the experience. Now, the meaning making and analyzing that's a whole different story. That's very complex, as you just pointed out. But can you talk a little bit about this design intent versus measurement thing that helped you come up with these biometric storyboards?
Yeah, so this is, it kind of goes back to like Andres' kind of an opening remark that basically said our main job usually as researcher is to help designers kind of achieve their design intent, that their vision, their creative vision they have. And in order for us to achieve that, we first need to know what that design intent means. And then once we know that, then we can look at how players are experiencing the product, and then see what are the barriers to achieving that, that vision for designers. And then we try to kind of solve them one by one and bring that player experience closer to what the designers intended for them to experience. So that's, I think, maybe one way of looking at it. There might be some research that you may do and say, okay, I want to contribute to that designer's vision. Like, it's more like a fundamental research that I want to help designer to, iterate on their vision, maybe, rather than bringing player experience closer to that vision. So that's kind of a different set of kind of, let's say, problem or research approach. But with what we kind of discussed, I did for my, sorry, Andres, did you?
No, I was wondering, so essentially, I find this very interesting. So what you're saying is that the user researchers become designers also, or at least influence the design in a more collaborative fashion with the design team, as opposed to just signing a report and giving it back.
So I think that may need a whole session that we talk about, like
yeah, exactly.
kind of a user researcher relationship to the design team. But I would say both approach are valid. You may have a case that you benefit from a researcher who writes a report for your game, and you look at it and then figure out some improvement. Or there might be a cases that you benefit from having a researcher embedded in the design team, and you work closely with them to kind of come up with that vision for your game or for the feature that you are designing.
Very cool. So I feel like provoking you guys a little bit here with a question. So my field is game data science and sort of large scale analytics in games, right? And I often find myself in a situation where working with a game, we have several 100,000 players or millions of players, and we work with data across a lot of games. Since about 2005, 2007, really taking flight, say maybe from 2012 onwards, we've seen a revolution in the games industry in terms of how much data, like telemetry data, is being used. Now that we have access to ridiculously detailed records of how the player interacts with the game, how does that change the role of games user research? Is analytics just another tool in the toolbox, and do we even need to worry so much about measuring the player experience anymore if we can measure everything players do in the game and run millions and millions of A/B tests just to try and figure out what's the best, how do we design this level to get the players through this level as fast as possible? Are there any pitfalls in this, what I call the allure of data? I'm being very cheeky now.
I mean, tons of pitfalls, right? Like you're basically, once you trust data over over just the experience with the experiential feedback that you're getting from your player, you might be led astray. And I know this is a thing with stakeholders and management. Everyone really loves loves data. Everyone loves numbers. People love eye tracking, and they love seeing those overlays and these visual things. But you always have to ask yourself, like, what are the conclusions that I'm trying to draw here? And is the data is basically your support team, right? Like if you're sort of playing this as a team sport, it's not your quarterback. The data is not your quarterback as much as the data scientists want you to believe that. But the data is sort of the support team. I know nothing about American football, so this analogy is going to go down really bad because I don't even know like how that actually works. But
perfect,
you know. This is the thing. There's other methods that are driving it. And one of the things I think that we've all learned working in games user research is mixed methods is really where it's at. There is no clear path where you can say, okay, I'm a purist for the data, I'm a purist for the qualitative. No. There's not the one thing that you should be a purist about. You should be open to all the methods, and you should combine them in a way that works for your research question. And I think we should do a whole other episode that we can do about research questions.
About research questions.
Exactly.
Yes, I agree,
right?
I agree.
That's the whole thing. Like asking the right questions at the beginning is really what kind of drives all of the methods and the player experience.
It shapes everything, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So all right. So we are rapidly burning daylight here. So I wanted to move us on to another thing that we've been planning to talk about, and that is sort of a lot of research has, both from industry and academia, has gone into trying to figure out what player experience is, how we measure, etc. So what don't we know? Like, can we mention just a couple of sort of things that this is what we really should be focusing on in the next 5 years to try and figure out when it comes to the player experience?
Maybe I can answer that. One thing that I'm trying to currently think about is how can we, as researcher, how can we better help developers? So the answer may not be inventing new methods, but the methods are still the same method as like 10, 15 years ago. We are still like collect data, talk to players, collect more data. Like that hasn't changed much, but I think how we can make them more accessible for developers is the key to me. And also considering how maybe even digesting the analysis and the data and then making the knowledge or insight available. And that's a direction I took in the new book. So the first book, which was on user research, my new book is on interaction design guideline. And that's what I thought, like, if I want to get my research maybe have an impact, I don't need to talk about methods and try to teach everyone to run the studies themselves. I can just give them the guidelines to follow and then have an impact on their game. So that's the kind of my current struggle is that exact piece on how we can have impact on the actual production. And that impact may not be through research. It might be through, or not through like a, primary research. It might be through something else. So that's what I'm trying to figure out at the moment.
Yeah. Lennart, what do you think is our biggest knowledge gap when it comes to player experience?
What's our biggest what?
What's our biggest knowledge gap? What's the biggest challenge?
Knowledge gap. Yeah. I think
I know what I'm going to say, but
I think it's. I don't think there's one big one. There's several smaller ones, which I think is, for me, it's really arriving at a robust theoretical understanding for one piece, because I've toyed around with these different models on how you can actually understand it and visualize it for myself as well, to just kind of visualize it, like how it actually makes sense. So that's the one piece where I'd like to have a better grounding for it. And then the other piece is, of course, how do we make sure that we have easy and fast ways to get at it. And maybe that's inventing new methods. Maybe that is improving existing methods. I think that's along the lines of what Pejman said. Yeah. It is really looking at what's the best way to look at this from multiple angles. And a lot of that you see is some of our colleagues in the industry are doing exactly that. They're building tools. I think one of the biggest things that I think will change, and this is going to make you happy as a data scientist, is the change of machine learning, right? Like, and what machine learning can do. It affects so many areas of our lives already. And I think it's really powerful in terms of helping us be assisted in our, I think the artificial intelligence part where we are assisted in our decision-making becomes really good and will become really good over the next couple of years. We still need to be, we need to make smart and informed choices. So we still need to have that sort of researcher angle, but I think the assistance that will come from the artificial intelligence community will be absolutely excellent. Yeah.
I would agree. I think if I should add just one extra element here, it would be the correlation between the laboratory-based measures and the large-scale data that we can track from every single player of a title, plus a lot of other sort of large-scale contextual data. Like how do we properly join those two perspectives and make them synergistic rather than competitive, as we sometimes experience, right? But we are unfortunately running out of time here. So this has been incredibly interesting. I think there is heaps more to dive into from this early conversation about games user research. We will explore more topics in the future. For more on games user research, I can recommend going to gurbook.com. That is gurbook.com to check out our book. So our listeners, thank you for listening in today. We hope it was enjoyable and informative. We will be back with future episodes and hopefully more production value also. All the best to everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Awesome.